Good morning, everybody. It's your girl, Supa Cindy, and live on the Viral Studio on the Zoom, where you can also go to WEDR.com to check out this interview. I have Miami Police Chief Jorge Colina. Good morning, Chief.
Hey, how are you, Cindy?
So good. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to 99 JAMZ listeners. You know, a lot going on. I know you're super busy. So let's get right into it. How long have you been with the Miami Police Department?
Almost 30 years or about 30 years.
Wow, high five. Wow, 30 years. How did you become, like, what were your rankings that you became the chief? How does that work?
So I started as a police officer out in patrol, like we all do. And after a certain amount of time, I took a promotional exam, was promoted to sergeant, and then to lieutenant, and then ultimately promoted to a commander, and then to a major. Then I was an assistant chief, and I was the chief of every division before ultimately becoming the chief of police. So I pretty much worked my way up the ranks.
You kind of sound like my story. I started as an intern on 99 JAMZ, and here I am.
Yeah, that's
All
awesome.
right. So what is the area that the Miami Police Department covers? Because I know there's so many departments. What is the Miami Police Department's area?
So a lot of our neighborhoods on the north side, we have the Upper East Side of Miami, which is Biscayne Boulevard, all the way to 82nd Street. We cover, and I'm going to give you some of the neighborhoods because people will have a better idea.
Yeah.
Little Haiti is part of the city of Miami. Liberty City is part of the city of Miami. Wynwood, Overtown, Brickell, Coconut Grove, downtown, Alapata, Flagler Street, Southwest 8th Street. All that falls within the city of Miami.
Okay. So when we saw Miami on the first 48, that was the city of Miami Police Department, the Miami Police Department?
It was, yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So I wanted to ask, what type of sensitivity training do the officers go through? Like, what are the training courses that are going on?
So, and you know, just so the viewers understand, I'm going to be speaking about Miami. Some departments may have different training or
Yeah.
no training or starting to institute training. But in Miami, we've incorporated over the last few years quite a bit of different training. So we have implicit, explicit bias training. We have de-escalation training. We have communicating with the community training.
Mm-hmm.
We train the police officers in these things, and then we train the supervisors with a component of that because that has a different element. You know, it's very important that the first line supervisor, the sergeant that's out there that has 4 or 5 or 6 policemen reporting to them, that they kind of explain this in a broader sense of how, man, you treat people right and you do the right thing by people, that makes it safer for you to do your job and for you to be able to perform your job. And so those are different elements, but very critical that we push that training down.
And it's like once they have this training, because I know in radio, like I take training classes, but then I also like every like year and a half they update us and retrain us just a little bit, like to pointers and to remind us of what is what. Do officers go through the same thing?
They
Or
do. So they do. We have training where we keep bringing them back and kind of re-implementing some of those same concepts because, as you know, unfortunately, you provide a training to someone and if you don't keep reinforcing that, it's lost. And so we do that. And then while we do that, we'll incorporate other things like bias-based policing. And so we'll get to implement other elements of that just to kind of reinforce the thought.
Oh, okay. So let's get into the protests that have been going on. So the first day of protesting, there was an attempt to vandalize the Miami Police Department headquarters as they did in other cities. Police cars were burned. How was that situation handled?
So I'm very proud of the restraint that the officers showed. I have a very young police department, and a lot of times when you're young, when you're in your mid-20s, for example, you don't have the same patience, is the truth. You don't have really the same level of maturity than someone who's been around a while and has already experienced this kind of thing. And so the truth is, though, that those young officers that I have, sometimes people criticize the millennials. I got to tell you, they showed us all. Their level of restraint was incredible. I didn't want to see, obviously, those cars burned. That's taxpayer dollars that pay for those cars. But ultimately, the fact that no one was seriously hurt, and we didn't have to seriously hurt anyone, and we were able to maintain order and peace, and nothing happened to our station. I was happy with the end result.
I saw that because on the first day of protesting, which was Saturday, I went to the one in Coral Gables. And then when I was leaving the one in Coral Gables, which the Coral Gables one was peaceful. And when I was leaving there, I was like, let me go to the Miami one because I know a lot of my friends were at the Freedom Tower. So I tried to meet up with them, but I saw no people. I'm like, where did everybody go? Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know they were on the bridge blocking traffic. So I just ended up coming home. But I saw as the days went by, you guys maneuvered differently with blocking roads and doing things differently. So from the first day to the following days, even to today, because there's protesters every day, what things did you guys do?
Well, even the first day, the part that was deflating for us, the part that kind of hurt us in our heart really was, man, we've done a lot to build in Miami. We have our own bad history, bad things that have happened here in the city of Miami, but we've made such incredible strides. And that protest that started at the Freedom Tower grew to a big crowd, and they marched down here. And we were kind of going along, blocking the streets so they were able to march peacefully. And it was very peaceful. Unfortunately, when they got to the back of the station, that's when you have those people that will start getting aggressive. And then someone else that maybe had no intention of getting aggressive, they kind of get sucked in. It becomes that mob atmosphere. And I just really wish it wouldn't have happened, because we could show the rest of the country that you can protest and you can be heard,
Mm-hmm.
and you could be angry, and you should be angry. And that doesn't mean that you have to destroy property or hurt someone. The rest of the days, fortunately, it went just like that. We're monitoring movements. We try to stay away so people don't feel like we're infringing on their rights. If it looks like they're going to go somewhere where we're worried that they may try to, burn a property or loot, then we'll show ourselves. But Cindy, we really try to give people space, so they don't feel like we're trying to infringe on their rights.
Yeah. How do you separate? You said a good point, like the looters and the people that are not there for good intentions and not to protest peacefully get blended in amongst the people who are being peaceful. How do you separate that? Like, how do you know the difference of who's and what's what?
The truth is that you don't know. And that's why, the message from us and a lot of the community leaders here in the city has been, please help us. Don't just put this on our shoulder. If you're out protesting, and you have every right to, and you see that someone wants to do something that is improper and illegal, separate yourself from that person. Let them kind of stick out like a sore thumb. Because if they do something that forces us to come in and disperse the crowd, they stopped your right to assemble. They stopped your right to free speech. It wasn't us. Our hand would have been forced. Well, don't let it happen. And we saw so many times where the protesters would not let other protesters throw rocks. I don't know if you saw the story. There was a line of protesters, Cindy, that lined up in front of a CVS here in downtown.
Yes.
I mean, that's awesome. That's what we asked people to do. Please help us. And they did help us. And, it's just, that's the way we should be functioning, as a team, as a group, understanding that we should be respectful of each other all the time. And if someone wants to act a fool, call them out, call them out on it.
Exactly. And I, like you said, I love the way they stop the looters, because then when looting starts happening, things start getting burned down. The whole point of these protests gets lost in the shuffle. And what makes the headlines is the looting and not why we're out there. So I agree.
100%.
So the other day, Trump made a statement which stated, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, which originally came from 1967. The Miami police chief at the time, Chief Walter Headley, used that phrase. And he had a history of bigotry against the Black community. So with it being tagged to the Miami Police Department, how was that handled? I was like, oh, come on.
It was terrible. And I'll tell you why. So it's 1967. And the date shouldn't excuse the comment, but let's keep it real. 1967, half the police department, if not all of them, probably were members of the Klan. I mean, that's just a terrible time in the history of this country. But some of the outlets that put that out there, they didn't write the date. They just put Miami police chief, when the looting starts. So I got all kinds of messages, Lord, tweets and threats from around the country. Fortunately, it was revealed, hey, this was in 1967. Mm-hmm. It's important, though, to not forget that. Sometimes people think hey, put that behind you. No, don't put it behind you. Keep those things right in the front where you can see them and be reminded of how outrageous those kind of comments are, and anti-American more than anything else, because this is a republic. You're supposed to be able to go out and assemble, and you're supposed to be able to go out and be heard. I mean, it's in the Constitution. That's what makes us great. So to want to kind of suppress that, not only was it bigotry at the time, but quite frankly, it's un-American.
Were you part of the police department in the 1980s when the riots happened?
I wasn't. I started in 1990. What I experienced was the second Lozano riots. So if you recall, we had an officer who shot someone on a motorcycle, and he and his passenger both died. He was arrested, and when he was acquitted is when there was the riots that we had here. So I did participate in that, and that was, as a rookie officer, those were scary times, without a doubt. That was very uncomfortable to be out and see what was happening.
Wow. So, Chief, the officer that murdered George Floyd had 18 negative comments on his record. And the Sun Sentinel reported that the Fort Lauderdale police officer that shoved the female protester who was protesting peacefully, that was kneeling, he's been let go and fired. But during his 4 years with the Fort Lauderdale Police Department, he had been involved in at least 14 violent arrests, brawls that ended with him or other officers punching or using stun guns on people. The list goes on and on of what was on his record. How many things is an officer allowed to have on his record before action is taken?
So it depends on what it is. And it's something that's really difficult. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So an officer can do something that one act is obviously enough. You don't need to even have a history. You can have a clean record, a clean slate. But if you do something that is serious enough, you could be terminated just for that one incident. And we've done that. We've had incidents where, yeah, the officer had never been in trouble, but what he did was bad enough that he needs to get fired. It's just like you've never committed a crime, but you went and robbed a bank and they caught you. Yeah, you go to jail. Mm-hmm. So it's that kind of thing. Now, if the complaints are discourtesy, for example, oh, the officer was rude. Okay, so what does that mean? Some people feel, if you got a ticket, that was rude, for example, and they'll make a complaint. Or we have circumstances where somebody in the neighborhood will not want an officer that is enforcing the law in their neighborhood, and they'll make multiple complaints. So, and we'll see that. We'll see it, wait a minute, it's always the same person. We don't take it away from the officer's file because it's a complaint, but we'll see that it's the same person that keeps complaining on the same officer. If the allegations are more serious, there is something that you can do where you kind of look at it collectively. And then when the officer does something, it's called progressive discipline. So, you have a history of complaints and they get more serious. And then the officer does something that is borderline a termination case where he could lose his job. So that, coupled with the history, you can fire the person and hope to get them fired. The biggest problem, Cindy, is not the firing. The biggest problem is that, at least in the state of Florida, there's an arbitration system. And some of the cases have been, quite honestly, a little shocking that we have fired someone. They go to arbitration and they get their job back. And that is, we don't have a choice in the matter. Once an arbitrator says they get to go back to work, that's it. That's the law. That's very difficult because then that officer's oftentimes even more emboldened. And so if we're going to put a termination case together, we like for it to be as solid as possible. So that he
doesn't have the chance of coming back.
Yeah, because once he comes back, when you fire him again, and I've had this happen, I've been sued for it, then they say that you're retaliating. It's not retaliating. It's just that you're not a good policeman. You shouldn't wear a badge. You make us all look bad. So that system is old. It's antiquated. That needs to be changed. That needs to be changed in Tallahassee, where, you go to this arbitration. Sometimes the facts are, indisputable, and yet they'll get the job back. And that part's disturbing.
Chief, when people get stopped, there's so many videos on IG and social media of people getting stopped and filming when they get stopped. Can you give us tips on when, because we're already like terrified, scared. Like me, I drive 30 miles per, well, no, I'm a speeder, sorry. But I haven't been unlucky to get stopped. Let me not lie on the Zoom. But when you get stopped, give us what we are to do. Like, what are the tips of how to do a right stop on our end?
So it's a great question. There's a few things that people don't understand. And when I mean people, I mean the person being stopped and the officer. I mean both. And I'm going to give you a real quick example. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people keep their wallet under the driver's seat of your car. So the officer walks up, you go down there to grab your wallet because you know that you're not a criminal and you haven't done anything wrong. And it just doesn't occur to you that the officer might worry about that. Mm-hmm. The officer now yells at you. You're offended that the officer says, hey, what are you doing? The officer's offended that you don't understand why he got upset that you reached under the seat because you could have a gun there. That's where it kind of goes sideways. So for me, I think it's understanding and communicating on both sides. I think if the person just says, officer, this is what I'm going to do now, up front, instead of doing it and assuming that it's cool, say it. The officer, quite frankly, I think it would be so great if they just explained, hey, listen, I'm sorry. The reason that I got the way that I did is I don't know who you are. I don't know where you're coming from. And I see you reaching under the seat. And quite frankly, it scared me because if you have a gun there, I could lose my life. And then people understand. They think, oh, you know what? You're right. I should have told you. Now we don't have a situation that went ugly. And I really think it's just a matter of explaining. Why can't people just communicate?
If we have tinted windows, should we lower all our 4 windows? Should we have our hands on the steering wheel like this? Like what do we do besides, what you said as far as not leaving your personal ID underneath the seat?
I think without a doubt, if you have tinted windows, lower the windows, just because then they can see inside and that there isn't multiple people, or if there is, they can see everyone. I think having your hands on the steering wheel always helps. I think when you do those things, you're kind of sending the message to the officer, hey, I'm just driving down the street. I'm cool. You're cool. Let's be cool. And you're kind of overtly sending that message. And I think all of those things are helpful.
Does a police officer have the right to check your car? At what point, if they say they want to, search your car, do you have to let an officer search your car? Like, what are the rules for that?
So no, they don't have a right to search your car. Most people will allow. So if the officer says, may I look in your trunk, for example, a lot of times for, I don't know what reason, people will say, sure. Maybe they're thinking I don't have anything to hide. But the truth is, no, that's up to you whether you allow them to search your car or not. Let's say the windows go down and they smell pot. Even then, they really only have enough time to speak to you as it would take for them to call, let's say, a narcotics dog over to check the outside of your car. Mm-hmm. If they're going to write you a ticket, that can only take as long as it takes a reasonable person to write a ticket. So they can't sit there and write a ticket for an hour while canine is coming and
waiting
they're holding
for a dog. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, that's all unreasonable. It's, if you're going to give someone a ticket, what's the length of time, that an average person to write a ticket? They don't have the ability to search your car unless they tell you, hey, listen, this car was used in a crime. So I need you to step out and this is what's going on. But then because that car is getting towed and it's being confiscated. And so you know what's going on. But aside from that, no.
Okay, that's some good inside, information. So ever since everything is going on, right? Before all of this happened, how often did the chiefs from different districts get together and talk about things? And then how often are you guys speaking now?
So, I've been interviewed by a few different networks and on national TV, because right away I came out and spoke about what happened in Minneapolis and how horrific that was. And no one should be saying, well, what did George Floyd do? Or what was his criminal history? It has nothing to do with anything of what occurred there. Mm-hmm. The amount of people that I have personally seen in law enforcement and even some unions that have come out to say how horrific and unacceptable that is. Honestly, Cindy, I don't remember seeing that in the past. And so I think that's a very good sign that has kind of been lost in the riots and the things that have occurred, that this many people in law enforcement have come out and said what it is. And that's important that you're putting it out there. Hey, man, this is unacceptable because other people can then speak up. We have policemen here that might feel like, oh, I can't say anything because, that might be, not cool. Well,
Mm-hmm.
no, if the chiefs are saying it, hey man, that's unacceptable, then, people will know that they can come out and denounce it for what it is. As a chief, the conversations have become more and more progressive over the last couple of years, which is great. We speak all the time. We had a chiefs meeting. I'm a member of the Major Chiefs Association, which is the chiefs of the biggest cities in the country. We had the chief of Minneapolis on with us. We all speak about the things that we need to do. In Minneapolis, they still have a policy that allows you to, different neck restraints. Most apartments don't allow that. Most apartments, that's not part of your policy. So those are some of the things that we discussed where that should be uniform across the country. You can't grab somebody around the neck, the throat, put pressure for any length of time. One thing is grabbing and going to the ground and then you're done. Okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But that constant pressure, that should not be in anyone's policy. I don't care what your training is. It shouldn't be part of anyone's policy.
Chief, does the department acknowledge that there is a major issue of systematic racism happening? I mean, like, at this point, the George Floyd murder basically put everybody to the tipping point, and now it's, blown up into what it is. But is there acknowledgement that are certain officers that have this issue?
Yes, and I explain it this way because sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. And I've told a few people, listen, first of all, we all know, let me put it to you this way, Cindy. People don't have a problem saying that we have bigoted people in our community, in society, right? We know that. We know that people have biases. Everyone has biases. We know some people's biases are very serious and they're bigots. Well, if you acknowledge that that exists in society in general, what makes you think that it wouldn't exist in a police department? There is no, magic pill that they give you in the academy that all of that leaves your mind and your heart. It's
Mm-hmm.
our job to, when we discover this or find it out, to then remove those officers. That's when then it falls on us. But to pretend that that doesn't exist in police departments, I think it's naive because it exists everywhere.
True. So a huge part of the Black community does not trust the police. And it's not just because of the George Floyd and the last year, 2, 3 years of the injustices that have happened towards Black people with the police interactions across the country. This is years upon years. So a lot of people in the Black community do not trust the police. What do you feel like we can do to try to reprogram the thoughts of the Black community of not trusting the police?
What I would say, and I know it's difficult, but honestly, it's old advice and it's good advice, and everybody should really live by it, is, treat everybody as an individual. And so not only do we tell our officers that here, please treat people as individuals. Don't judge them based on stereotype, by how they look, their gender, their color, where they live. Don't do that. If treat them as an individual. I would ask that people do the same with the police. If you see somebody in uniform, don't assume that they're a bad cop, an abusive cop, a bigoted cop. Treat them as an individual and judge them by their own actions. Now, if they give you reason to feel that way, that's different. But Cindy, I'll give you an example. I've walked into places in my uniform. I've looked at someone. I'm always very civil. So I don't need to know you. I walk in, I look at you, say, hey, how are you? How's it going? It's just the way I've always been. I've walked in and said hello to people and they've looked at me and turned away. And I thought, hey, well, what's that about?
Do I
don't
know
know
you personally?
Right. Did I do something? Do I smell funny? What's going on here? So I see it. I have felt it. I've seen people look at me with disdain just because I'm wearing a uniform. And it makes me sad because I've come here for 30 years to try to do a good job. And I'm here when there's a storm and my wife is home alone and I can't communicate because the phones are down. But I'm here because it's my job to keep the community safe. And so, that's just one example to have someone look at me like that doesn't feel good. So, I just ask, man, be kind to each other. That I think it's really simple. Be kind to each other and judge people on their own individual acts. Don't generalize, don't look at people as one, a group as one, and stereotype. Don't do it to us, and we shouldn't do it to you.
Do you think that now officers will be held more accountable, like things that were let go and brushed under the rug in the past? And I'm talking about different departments, not just yours. Do you think now officers will be held more accountable for any negative actions that they do?
I think it's possible. Honestly, it depends on the individual department, and it depends on the individual chief of that department. Whoever makes the final decision on discipline and termination, it just depends on that person. I'd like to think that that people would think, man, I have my responsibility isn't just to train the officers to go out and do their job. My responsibility is to make sure that I have the best group of officers that I can have. But time's going to tell, Cindy. I have seen, I know people don't want to hear this right now, but I have seen progress, and I've seen things getting better, and I hope that they continue. It doesn't mean horrible things won't happen, but speaking in general terms, just like I said before, all these different chiefs and policemen coming out and saying, man, that was wrong. Those officers should be arrested. I've never heard that before, and I'm hearing it now. And so progress is being made.
And COVID-19 basically gave us a new normal of how we're maneuvering and how we're moving around. With this situation happening, do you think now this has set a precedence for a new normal with relations between the Black community and the police department?
In terms of the COVID?
No, like how COVID-19 has set a new normal of how we're maneuvering, how we're moving around, we're wearing masks. Now with relations, concerning relations between the Black community and police, is there now a new normal now?
I think there can be. I really do. I think that this idea of it's on you to stop the other officer, because a lot of that's been discussed. It isn't just, everybody can acknowledge that the officer that's on him, right? He's clearly the person responsible for what happens to George Floyd. But the discussion of the other officers has been a big one. So I think without a doubt, that can have an impact where the officers know, listen, it doesn't have to be that you didn't do anything. If you don't say anything or you allow it, you're culpable. So I think definitely that's going to have an impact. We'll see. Time will tell. But I think that could be part of the new normal, where an officer is a little quicker to grab one of their coworkers and say, hey, man, slow down. That person's under control already. Stop. I think that definitely will happen more.
So we have to unfortunately wrap things up. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people communicate, the community, the residents of Miami, communicate with the police department and actually get communication through to someone?
So we have a community affairs section, but we have town halls all the time. We have community meetings all the time. And certainly if somebody wanted to organize a meeting, they certainly can. And we always come. If I can't come myself, at minimum, somebody from my staff is there, or a group of officers that work in that area always come. It's very important to us. So if anybody ever wants to get together, we're always down for that, because it helps us do our job better. Mm-hmm. So if somebody wants to go to the City of Miami webpage, City of Miami Police webpage, they can make a request right there. You can always email me. I can leave you my email, and I can forward that to our community relations. And we can always set meetings up, and we're always open to that.
So where do they go to communicate with the Community Affairs Department?
They can go on the webpage, and if you can either go through Facebook or just on the webpage, City of Miami Police Department, to request a meeting. But if that's complicated and somebody wants to email me directly, I'll give you that real quick. It's 1126@miami-police.org. If somebody wants to set up a meeting or a town hall or a discussion panel, anything like that, just email it to me. I'll push it to community relations. They'll make contact and we'll set something up.
I want to thank you so much. This morning, we've been speaking to Miami Police Chief Jorge Colina. You've been very open and honest, and trust me, I'll be emailing you for another interview so we can get updates on what's going on. And we appreciate your service, and thank you so much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you, Cindy, and you've been super.
Hey, always. Your girl, Supa Cindy, Community Matters, 99 JAMZ. Let me